Let's do it.
Hello, Josh, again.
Hello, Peter. How are you?
Yes, I'm great. I'm great.
How's
Thank you
the
for taking
jungle
some
treating
time with
you?
me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to spend some time with you. I wish we got more time together.
Yeah. Well, it's turning out the way I get to hang out with my friends these days is to make an appointment and to interview them. That's actually the most efficient way to actually see what they're doing. So hence we're here. So as
Yes.
I've said, I'm speaking to people in technology, technologists who are doing things around computation, artificial intelligence, for you, novel drug discovery, who also have kids. It's a key part, and how they're thinking about their education with their kids, skill set, and what the future might hold for their kids and how they can start preparing for that. So, Josh, for anyone who doesn't know, is my old business partner. So we built a company together called TVN. So we spent many an hour together over the years, but now it comes
15
down
years ago, Pete.
how many?
We are 15 years ago was when we started. So we are extremely dated,
We're so
but
dated.
also current.
Yeah. So Joshua, for anyone who has not come across Xylo Bio, can you maybe describe what Xylo Bio does and how you would describe it potentially to Tol and Ashi, your children, who are how old now?
Yeah, so Asha is 8 and Tal is 12 years old. So he started high school this year. Asha's in year 3. So Xylo just rebranded from Xylo. So it was a bit easier to explain what we did before the rebrand. They haven't caught up with the rebrand yet. I'm like, we're not called that anymore. And they're like, yeah, I remember you saying something about that. But yeah, I mean, I guess the story has really kind of evolved over the course of the last couple of years as we've done deep drug discovery into serotonergic space. Uh, when we launched the company in 2021, we were really sort of psychedelic first in our messaging and in our research. So, really, we started by doing novel drug discovery, rational and computational drug discovery to explore the chemical space around natural products, psychedelics. But the goal was really to develop novel therapeutic. So people saw our name and they automatically assumed that we were, in some way developing psilocybin or one of these compounds that you've heard a lot about and have maybe heard about other people using. But that's actually not what we were doing. What we were doing is called structure activity relationship building. So this is basically determining how when you make changes to the backbone of a chemical structure, how that influences its pharmacology and its, profile in terms of developability as a potential drug candidate. And our initial kind of thought on how we would establish the company was okay, well, there are companies that are developing drugs like psilocybin and LSD for psychedelic assisted therapy. What we could do is develop novel compounds that could be used for that application but had a shorter duration of action. So instead of someone going to a clinic and being administered psilocybin for like 6 hours, we could develop one where they could go for 1 hour to 3 hours. So that was one of our sort of concepts. The other concept was a subperceptual dosing drug. So, you've probably heard or read about microdosing. So we thought, okay, well, we can develop a novel drug that is specifically optimized for microdosing. And then the third thing that we wanted to explore was this potential for well, what if we could develop a drug candidate that actually didn't have hallucinatory effects at all, but it still engages with the same receptor as psychedelics engage with? And so, that was sort of like the moonshot idea. And, when we started, we really didn't know what the research would tell us, right? We were just, okay, we're going to kick off this drug discovery project. We're going to build out a portfolio of compounds and we're going to study them and we're going to optimize them to be highly targeted, right? So like the background to this is that all of psychiatric drug discovery has been, you know, basically fortuitous sort of, coincidences of people making changes to either natural products or, other compounds. And just like it goes into people and it's sort of this, just miraculous discovery that it has some effect on people's psychology. So serendipitous drug discovery is basically the whole story for neuropsychiatry. SSRIs, antidepressants that many people take, about 1 in 6 or 7 people in Australia are on antidepressants. These are just like serendipitous discoveries.
So when you say serendipitous, you mean like the chemist was playing around with something, took it
yeah,
by accident or to see what would
yeah.
happen, and suddenly they go on some sort of journey.
That's right. Chemists were playing around with molecules and then it somehow went into a human and then they realized, oh, this is actually helping people feel less anxious or helping people, deal with depression. And, the other thing about neuropsychiatry and drug discovery in neuropsychiatry is that the drugs that have been used are typically very dirty drugs. And when I say dirty drugs, I mean they hit a number of different receptors. So, nobody really knows how they work. So, people thought for the longest time that antidepressants worked because they, allowed people to, they sort of rebalanced the brain's production of serotonin. And, that hypothesis has actually come under question. SSRIs were developed in the, 80s and 90s. It's only come under question, up until fairly recently, within the last 2 years. They're like, actually, we think this might not be why they're working. So
Just on that, why did they think it was? Because I thought they were closing off like the not the synapse or it's the reuptake of the dopamine or serotonin into the receptor. Is that the
SSRI
theory?
stands for, it's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So the idea was that by inhibiting the reuptake of serotonin, that actually there was more around for, moderation of people's mood and cognition and, their just behavior. And that has come into question as recently as, within the last couple of years. We really don't know why these things work. But, these drugs engage with all kinds of different receptors. Okay. So, and like one of the main problems with antidepressants, you've probably heard a number of stories about how they take a long time to kick in. You have to take them for 4 to 6 weeks before you see any effect. They don't work in 40 to 60% of the people who take them. They come with all these different side effects, particularly sexual dysfunction and sleep disorder and all kind of weight gain. And so, you know, this is just like what we have. And
Mm.
so, unfortunately, it's just been, like there's just not much out there to use. We don't know how it works. The drugs were discovered through just serendipity. And, it's just a really hard space, right? So, the trend for big pharma was actually to divest over the last decade or two in neuropsychiatry, just based on the fact that is really hard and there are no real promising avenues to sort of reboot the effort in neuropsych.
Hmm.
And that was until fairly recently when psychedelics sort of became rediscovered as a potential avenue to explore for treatments in neuropsychiatry. Psychedelics also are dirty drugs. So, psilocybin, the primary receptor that it engages with that induces the hallucinatory effects has been proven to be this receptor called 5, so a serotonin receptor, but it hits 5-HT2B, C, A, and all these other ones. So it's just a very dirty drug. And the same is
So by
true
dirty, it's
for,
not precise.
yeah, not targeted. Yeah. So the sort of more scientific term is it's polypharmacological, right? It does not specifically target one receptor. So in our research, right, everything was about developing highly targeted drugs within the 5-HT system, but specifically oriented around the 5-HT2A receptor. And the tools that are available to us are, worlds away from what was around when SSRIs were developed, right? Because you can deploy computational means like large scale virtual screening, which is leveraging artificial intelligence to sort of predict how a potential candidate will bind with the receptor target and engage with it. And you can do that for millions of molecules at a time. Whereas, before you had to literally make the drug, test it in a test tube, and you get the data, and each experiment you do, there's experimental conditions you need to control for, like it's a slow and painful process, right? So anything that you can speed up about that process is going to lead to huge efficiencies, right? But then you also have these advances, particularly over the last 5 or 10 years, around robotics, and just like the scale with which you can do the wet lab experiments has really accelerated as well. So you got the computational side and the sort of robotic side have just hugely accelerated what you can do, and particularly what you could do like with not that much money. I mean,
Right.
biotech is incredibly expensive, but like these two advances really have impacted the earlier stages of drug discovery. The later stages, you're still going into humans. So, once you're in biological systems, complexity abounds. But like in the earlier stages, when you're just trying to, you know, do the discovery around what are the compounds that are of interest, and the sort of top of the funnel, technology has really accelerated and delivered in the last, call it 5-10 years. So yeah, I sort of
Okay.
meandered there a lot,
No,
but
that's
like
good. Let me jump in there then and see if I can explain it to a kid, and then you can correct me because that's a smart kid. That's a smart kid who's getting that. Here's my go. So there's been a huge growth of mental health disorders, anxiety, depression, addiction, people addicted to certain substances and drugs and alcohol. In the old days, there used to be very chance ways to find different drugs that might be able to help people. Like scientists stumbled across different drugs that turned out to be helpful, but more recently, but they weren't precise. So they might have been having multiple different effects. But where we're trying to get to now, because computers and technology has got a lot better, is that we're trying to be more precise in how these drugs that people can take to help them with mental health and different things can be a lot more precise. And so that's the stage we're at now, where we're trying to use all these tools such as artificial intelligence and robotics to make it ever so more precise. That that about right?
yeah, absolutely. I think like the way I explained what we do to our kids earlier on was just like there's a mushroom that is now being studied and proven to help people who have tried everything get over serious depression. Like, you know, doctors are now overseeing giving this, molecule that's in mushrooms to people who are so sad that there's just nothing that makes them feel better. And it's showing like a remarkable improvement. And so we're using technology to try and develop a new medication that can sort of, help people in that way, but is more accessible to more people. That's the way I explained it. It was like, it's a so specifically with psychedelics, it's like, okay, these drugs, people need to, be supervised when they're being given the drug for 6 to 8 hours at a time. It's showing a lot of promise, but it's just not scalable. It's going to hopefully help people, but it will be a niche therapy that will not crack the mainstream. And so, can we develop new drugs using technology in a highly targeted way that can help more people?
Yeah. So it was one of the inflection points in bringing this way of thinking back in vogue. Was it something like DeepMind and AlphaFold, AlphaGo, those type of, well, probably AlphaFold, right? So Google's technology. So they were trying to, well, they're still trying to do it today, trying to merge neuroscience and artificial intelligence and bring them together. They showed with the protein folding model that AIs are actually really good at chemistry. And yeah, so was that kind of one of like the turning points from an industry perspective to say, okay, we can actually, because you spend a lot of your time raising funding and getting venture capitalists to back your idea. I'm assuming that would have been a lot easier and a lot more palatable post something like AlphaFold than pre.
Yeah, so like the actual protein structure for the receptor that we're interested in and other receptors that we're trying to avoid, you know, those are relatively recent discoveries and they're published and made available for people to refine and optimize and use for research. And so, the large scale virtual screening that we did, we sort of leveraged a model that was published and then we modified it using our own wet lab data and our own assumptions about what we were trying to develop. And then, like, on the other side of that, there's now these databases of hypothetical drug candidates that are massive. I mean, billions of molecules that, like, these are molecules that don't exist definitely in nature and most likely have never been actually made before, but technology has basically hypothesized that this is a compound that could actually be made should it have any utility. And so what you can do is you can take those databases and you can basically refine the databases. And then, so let's say you go from, several billion hypothetical molecules to, in our case, 100 million. And then you take those 100 million that you're like, these on their surface have the characteristics that we are interested in. Let's see if they actually engage with the target that we now have a computational model of. And let's just, one by one, you literally simulate, okay, is this hypothetical molecule that someday could exist, does it bind with the receptor that you are trying to target? And, the output from that, you can then go and you can actually, you know, you can access these materials and then you can actually test them and, refinement along the way. But like, yeah, basically all these tools have empowered our drug discovery where now, we late last year arrived at our first candidate that we believe is the most selective activator of the 5-HT2A receptor that's ever been discovered. So, it's these tools that both have allowed for the discovery and the optimization of those compounds. I mean, we have a team of chemists, like just down the hall from where I am. We're actually doing chemistry, but in order to sort of whittle down the funnel of these are the compounds that are showing a lot of promise and that we want to take further, that's largely happening in silico or in a computer.
And so that's what you mean by like wet lab versus computational. So you almost do the virtual screaming, virtual screening. Sure, there has been some screaming at some point in the journey, but some virtual screening. So you use the computation to do that. You target that down to a smaller amount of potential targets, and then you get into the wet lab and actually target that in actual real life. Is that
Yeah, I mean, so let's say, we've whittled it down to a compound that we're interested in. We actually make that in the lab. So, smashing atoms together to get a molecule to show itself. So, regularly in our chat, our chemists will take a photo of the crystallization of a compound that we've been studying, and they'll say, yeah, like, check out the snowflakes of XYL 54321. And then, once we make it, we run it through these various studies to check the purity. So you can do crystallography and these other studies that are available to us at the research facility to ensure that we have what we think we have and that it is of a purity that we are comfortable with. And then, it's then sent off around the world to be studied by a number of partners that we have. So that's where, the robotics comes in. So it used to be that you had to build the capability of in-house to actually determine, is this engaging with the receptor and what's the downstream effects and how is it metabolized and, is it making it into the brain? All these things we do pretty routinely with partners in China and India and the US and in Australia and in Europe now. So yeah,
what's the
like we're
robotic element? So I get the screening and you get the testing in the lab. Like, how does robotics play a role in the process?
so, they have these well plates that you basically are testing a certain concentration of your drug candidate in, it could be the receptor that you're hypothesizing that it has activation with. And so, like, we'll routinely run, you know, tens of compounds at various concentrations, right? Because for each one, you're looking at, okay, this much drug, this much more drug, this much more drug, this much more drug in receptor one, receptor two, receptor three for,
Got it. Yeah.
hundreds of different candidates. So in the lab, like we're at the point where we've actually synthesized and characterized 850 of the refined drug candidates that we have discovered. And so we would never be able to do that if we weren't able to do it through partners who have these really sophisticated robotic systems where we literally get the data back, you know, within a week and a half.
So a researcher in the past would have been in a lab literally putting like, imagine like little blots into a test tube. Oh, there's one, that was one reaction, there's two. And now it's just like,
Yeah, exactly. It's all happening automatically. And I mean, for advanced candidates, we would run them through an off-target screen that tells you 44 other receptors of interest. Is it engaging with those off targets? So you're trying to ensure that your drug, once it goes into humans, will be safe and it's not hitting things that you don't want it to hit. So all this stuff is happening through robotics at our partners.
and so how many years are you in now with Xylo?
We are approaching 4 years. Yeah.
And do you think Xylo could have existed before the large language models came out or the access to them?
You know, so it's a good question. I think like there was a confluence of things that allowed us and other players in our little niche of the world to exist. One of them is definitely this technological advance that we have talked about, but the other one is just the destigmatization around the receptor target that we're interested in, because there was 50 years of prohibition before we even started the company, where doing science where you're seeking to activate this receptor, like it was considered an anti-target. So there are marketed drugs that are antagonists of the 5-HT2A receptor, but a agonist, like it used to be, if you were a chemist and you developed a compound that had any activation at this receptor, it was deprioritized. It was thrown in the bin, like because it was just assumed that if you activated that receptor, you would have a drug that elicited hallucinations, and like what's the point in terms of the therapeutic utility of said candidate? Like, no, we're not developing that type of drug. Whereas now that we're seeing later stage clinical trials with drugs like psilocybin or LSD and others that are showing meaningful therapeutic utility, that has sort of opened the door to doing drug discovery in this space. And then the technological advancements have, you know, allowed us to do our work in a accelerated fashion. So 4 years to arrive at a drug, a development candidate, which we're now scaling up in manufacturing and hoping to be in clinical trials for, early to mid next year. Like that is a very much accelerated time frame. It typically takes a lot longer than that.
Okay. Is there any way to kind of put that into context from like a dollar amount from, because I think it's public. Is it public how much money you guys have raised so far? Is that public knowledge?
Yeah, we've raised 12 million since inception USD. Um, and yeah, I mean, like, you know, last year to fund the stage that we're in now, we raised double what we had raised in the preceding 3 years. So, like, basically, the way I think about it is that we've funded 3 years of rigorous drug discovery, um, and made the type of progress that, like, a bunch of years ago, a company would have needed tens of millions of dollars to do that work. And so part of that is the efficiencies of that technology has afforded. The other part is, you know, the generous government incentives that the Australian government offers in the R&D tax credit. And, like we've just been really fortunate to have a lot of support from academia as well. So yeah, we've been able to do a lot on a shoestring budget.
So what's your hope over the next couple of years? Like how feasible, like what sort of timelines are you thinking that this might be able to start truly impacting and helping people? Like what's your outcome you're looking for here?
Yeah. So it's been really hard to talk about outcomes before relatively recently, because like now we actually have a candidate that we're like, this could be a drug. Whereas, in those first 3 years, like I said, it was just like it was discovery, and we were sort of trying to focus on those three broad categories that I told you about before. Whereas late last year we decided, well, kind of mid last year, we really decided, okay, we want to focus on the moonshot, which is the non hallucinogenic drug candidate, because it stands to have the most impact, right? Like, it really, if we're successful, that would be an absolute game changer. And so before I talk about like time horizons and what I think there, let me just tell you a little bit about the sort of target product profile that we're envisioning. So I talked about the side effects of antidepressants. One of the hallmarks of psychedelics is that they're rapid acting. So instead of having to take a drug for 4 to 6 weeks, these immediate post-dosing efficacy. So like the clinical trial results speak for themselves. Like you're seeing just huge reductions in depression scores after one dosing, which persist, 3 weeks, 3 months, beyond 12 months after a single dosing session. So that's profound. And they're non-addictive, right? Like there's a number of things that are really promising about that drug class that we're hoping to retain. In optimizing away the hallucinatory effects, like really the bar for what we're trying to develop is something that is rapid acting, doesn't have the side effects of antidepressants that people are taking right now, and shows improvements in depression scores for our first candidate. We're looking at a number of different candidates, different indications, but just in terms of the most advanced candidate, and does not require clinical supervision. So if this is something that can be administered at home and makes people feel better than, on par or better than antidepressants do, and it is rapid acting and it doesn't have side effects, like that is a fundamental game changer if those things hold true, right? And like ideal target product profile is something that can be taken episodically. So we've designed it to be safe to be administered repeatedly, which is something that psychedelics are not really. Well, this could be controversial among your audience, but like taking psychedelics repeatedly, one of its off-target effects, I talked about how it hits a lot of receptors. One of its off-target receptors that it hits is actually a liability for heart valvulopathy. And there's been and that's heart disease, so a hardening of the valves of the heart. Most likely not an issue for, you're taking this once.
Yeah, I was going to say, what sort of level and dosage do you think that's playing out at?
And no one has the answers to that just yet. But the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, has issued guidance around drug development in this area, and they have specifically cited HT2B, which is this other off-target, as a liability. And there have been drugs that were approved and on the market, which were withdrawn because of their activation of that receptor. So it's a consideration, and it's something that we've optimized away from, but to answer your question, like no one can tell you, if you're microdosing at this level for this many years, like it's going to lead to heart issues. Like that is not an answer that anyone has right now. But it was definitely a concern for us, and our candidate has no meaningful activation at that receptor. So it is safe to be administered regularly, but our hope is that, it can be administered episodically, meaning someone takes it for a period of time that they're experiencing symptoms, the symptoms go away meaningfully and they can stop taking it and they won't experience withdrawal symptoms, and it's non-addictive, and they can go back to not taking the drug, and then if the symptoms come back they can take it again. So that's the sort of ideal outcome. Acceptable outcome is something like an antidepressant that people take regularly. Like the way it's dosed is totally an open question, and we won't know that until later on, once we're in human trials. Back to your question about how long this will take and what's the sort of plan. So the first thing to note is that 1 in 10 drugs that get to first in human trials fails. Okay. So you're starting from that point. So this is a binary outcome oriented game. Drug development. So, the human trial pathway from your starting human trials until you have a drug on the market, it could be 5 years in a super accelerated fashion. It could be 7 years. It could be 12 years or more. This is a long road, which is why, and it's super expensive, right? You're talking about hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion dollars of, to fund the clinical development for these candidates. The way that the pharmaceutical industry works is that the pharmaceutical companies, something like 60% of their revenues actually come from technology that they bring in-house from companies like ours that are dealing with frontier tech. And so, the most likely sort of pathway for a drug candidate like XYL1001 is that we get it to a point where we've been able to show that it is safe and efficacious in humans, at which point we do either a co-development or a licensing partnership with a larger pharmaceutical company that is willing to fund the later stage trials and, take the drug to commercialization stages.
Because when you try and trial it in humans, for example, I can imagine that just becomes incredibly expensive.
Yeah. So there actually is really good infrastructure in Australia for doing early stage clinical development. And that paired with the government incentives in Australia make it a really hospitable place to do early stage clinical work. But most of that is in healthy volunteers. Once you get into patients, once you get into multi-site studies where you're talking about hundreds of patients in different locations, randomized placebo-controlled trials. It's very expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. So one question that people might be thinking, so I'll ask it, is just around, so as you described, the idea is to make it more precise, make it more effective, bring it down, allow people to take it potentially at home without supervision. And this is maybe more of a subjective question, but like a lot of the trials at the moment have been around using things like psychedelics with a therapist, so like therapist kind of guided. Do you think there will still be a role for the therapist in a drug discovery like this, or do you think that like how much do you think that the therapist and the guide would do you think would need to play, or to be closer to something like microdosing where people are just gradually feeling better, more for or just more awakened or more conscious based upon like smaller doses? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah. So this is a question that has, confounded neuropsychiatry forever. What is the role of the therapist relative to the role of the drug and the pharmacology and the, subjective or otherwise that the drug elicits? We have leading psychiatric advisors on our advisory board. We talk to them about this question. In neuropsychiatry, whether it's psychedelics or outside of psychedelics, there's a lot of debate about this. Some of the later stage psychedelic clinical trials, they're starting to talk about what is it, sort of like guidance. So it's either some of the companies that are doing these later stage trials are exploring psychedelic assisted therapy or more like supervision oriented. It's not a therapist there with them as they're having a subjective experience. It's more just like for safety, they're being supervised by someone who knows what to do. And like esketamine is a really good example where that has actually happened, where, esketamine is a ketamine nasal spray that was developed by Johnson and Johnson, and not a classic psychedelic, works with different receptors to, psilocybin, LSD, etc. But the way it's administered is in a clinical setting where the person is being supervised, but it's not a therapist there. It's not talk therapy. For a lot of these experiences, like no one's talking while they're going through the drug experience.
Yeah, that was something that I was speaking to a therapist who actually does a lot of work around this, and he was actually saying that a lot of the actual journey, they're there as a support net, like as a support, but the therapy is actually in the integration afterwards for him.
Yeah.
So the actual
Yeah.
journey itself is like making sure that people feel safe and they're actually all good in that process. But the majority of the work for him would be the integration afterwards, once they've
Yeah.
had that insight and
And
breakthrough.
the reality here is like, therapy works. And
Sometimes, I
it
think.
worked for, on a statistical basis,
Mm,
it has been shown to have effect for people. And, in order to get antidepressants, people are generally seeing a therapist and being prescribed medication. Um, the therapeutic plus the therapy tends to work better than just the therapy or just the therapeutic. So, I think like the way I view it is um, I'm really trying to think about okay, regulatory pathway. What do we need in order to have a chance? And like the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, does not, and they specifically called this out, they do not govern therapy from a therapist, right? They're about pharmacology and drugs and devices and food and other things that humans are putting on or in their body, or using for therapeutic effect. They're not about kind of how that's administered. So yeah, I try and think of it as okay, we want to develop the best drug, and then you know humans will develop the best protocol for how to ensure it has the best effect.
yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. That's cool.
At this stage, like it's just, it's still, even though we've been going for 4 years in the drug development life cycle, like we're still early stage. We're not in humans yet. Once you get into humans, everything changes.
Yeah. Exciting. So much potential and opportunity in that. It's cool. Very cool. I might shift gears slightly. So
Yep.
this concept of when I or AI grow up and thinking about children, and you mentioned, I think a nice segue into this. You said you're working with a consultant, so a lot of psychologists and stuff like that. And I wonder on this 4 year path that you're on now and all the access to understanding mental health and going deeper into that, is there any kind of like learnings that you're thinking about with your kids to help either support them or set them up like now where they're going through school? So hopefully, they're not getting to the point in a few years where they have the anxieties, the depressions, the addictions. Is there anything that you've seen that you think could be helpful that you think, oh, can I kind of guide the kids towards this?
Yeah. Oh, um, yeah. I mean, grapple with this on a daily basis, like with, parenting kids these days, technology is everywhere. It's just unavoidable. It's like, okay, you want your children to be proficient with technology. And yet also, that it's like really harmful to people. I mean, like we've seen that, right? Like I really feel like our generation was super fortunate to kind of have like the pre-technology childhood, and yet come of age at the time when this stuff was being introduced into society, because we're able to moderate, and I think like one of the existential challenges of parenthood is like setting the right example here, which is something that like I'm not always very good at. Um, you know, Rupal will regularly scold me for looking at my phone at inopportune times, which yeah is I'm I'm a faulty human being. I like,
Yeah, I hear you.
but
Not
but
about the faulty human being, but yeah. I hear you. Not about being a faulty human being, but sometimes it can be hard. I think you're right.
it's
It is that
challenging.
I've just been the more anyone I'm speaking to at the moment who has any sort of teenagers, the biggest issue that they actually have is how do I get my kid off social media? It is the problem for a generation, and you're working on things to help with addiction potentially, and you know I hope that we're not just seeing over the kind of like coming years just this whole need for addiction around like technology or and it's hard to even think about, but I mean, the dopamine plays on the same ways, whether it be like alcohol, cocaine, TikTok. It's actually playing on the same similar pathways as I understand it. It's still the same, so it could have a whole swathe of need for addiction centers. I mean, that sounds just crazy to even say that out loud, but like the reality of it could be true.
Yeah, I think like, we're lucky in our generation that we were born when we were and had the kind of upbringing that we had to be able to know what it's like to not have technology. But I also think our generation and, a little bit bleeding into the generation before and after is responsible for engineering products that are hijacking people's brains and in a extremely unhealthy way. Like I constantly grapple with providing my children access to technology in a healthy way, and also just like teaching, ensuring that they're not overly reliant on technology such that they can't like do simple things themselves, and also, that they have some sort of a healthy relationship with that technology. And I mean, you know I my solution, honestly, Talo is the only person in his year at school that does not have a phone. Like when he told Rupal and I that, like, we high-fived. We were like super elated about that. Like, we're the remaining holdouts. And we were just like, Tal, every time you bring it up, every time you raise this as an objection as to why you need a phone, like, it's adding a year to when you will actually get one. Because, like, he rides the bus himself. He can like maneuver the world. Like, I feel like it's more parents, paranoia driving the need to give children phones
Yeah.
rather than any rational reason.
Yeah, oh, my little darling is missing out on some sort of social communication. That is it. Like, I'm not being invited to parties. I'm not being communicated to. Like, it's actually nonsense, I think, the majority of it, but it's pretty easy to get sucked in. It was the same with, um, my eldest daughter with, social media for a long time. It was like we were the last kind of like holdouts. But yeah, like we've somehow given into that now. She's in year 8 and she's on social media and we're trying to limit it. I'm constantly thinking that we should just go back and nuke it. Yeah. But I see there's like movements. I've seen something in the UK about this. I feel like interesting, but like if you are the only parent doing it, there's like a movement in the UK around it's like the pledge. We will only give a phone or social media to our kids when they're like 15 or 16. And there's like a movement around it. It's almost like you do need a community to come together and go, do you know what? It's not just my kid, it's your kid as well, and your kid and your kid. And certainly it's kind of acceptable if you're not the only one there. So maybe I might
Yeah.
see more of that.
I also feel like, Australia has the advantage of having like, you know, lots to do outside of your house.
True.
Where I grew up, like I would spend months inside at a computer, like learning the internet. And you know, my kids, like, we go outside way more often than I was able to when I was a kid during certain parts of the year. And so like, yeah, I feel like we have something of an advantage there.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, I grapple with this all the time. I don't think, like, I'm not sure that prohibition is the right answer, but like, I feel like hold out as long as you can
yeah.
and, be
I do
present.
think there's different types, right, as well. You could be on just passively consuming TikTok videos like a zombie, zoop, 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 dopamine, dopamine,
Yeah.
dopamine.
Yeah.
Or you could be on some sort of smart, precision learning tool that was trying to target your specific level of education and taking the amount of time that you need to be indoors from like 7 hours down to 2 hours in a day so you can go out and surf, do jiu-jitsu, like whatever it is. Like that's a different conversation, right? And
Yeah.
so I feel like that's the bit as I speak to people now, which I become more optimistic to. You know, kid turns at like Nancy starts school at 8 o'clock. She's there till like 3:30. Out of that time that she's there, how much time is actually quality learning time? It's probably I bet it is probably about 90 minutes in a day. Like, I don't know, maybe 90 minutes, 2 hours of actual quality learning time. And so I'm hopeful that some of these AI driven tools, what you, I mean, you spoke a lot about precision, like are the tools that can be developed that say, okay, this is who I am as an individual student instead of this kind of like one to many approach. And can I start like, okay, what are the things that I need to learn? What are the things that I need to be interested in? Like, what are the projects that I can build? And can I start like having a more targeted education based upon that, and then maybe go and play outside, maybe go and play football or play tennis, or we are in Australia, go and surf and get in the water. Maybe the school day is kind of like the work day might be consolidated, the school day might be consolidated. I know you were very energetic. I'm like, give you as an example. I know you were a very energetic child. I remember you telling me the story about you were in nursery or something and they were reading stories and they were all sat down, like listening to the story, and you were doing like laps. You were running around the circle or something like that. Like you're a very energetic person even at that. And so, yeah, I just think about kids who just have like a lot of energy, and is is there maybe a healthier balance that we might be able to strike over the coming years, to actually condense the amount of time that you actually need to be on a screen, or just specifically learning, and then you can actually go and play, like go and like do whatever. What's your take on that? Is there anything that you're seeing from your world that you think might be pulled into education and how people learn?
I mean, look, most of this is just from like in my personal household world, right? Like, I think, you know, one thing I mean, in my work world, like, there is a mounting mental health crisis, and it's increasingly, closing in on young people, right? Like, I don't know if you want to get political at all in this conversation, but like the Maha movement and like, RFK coming in, like a lot of people ask me how I feel about that. And I'm like, look, in the executive order that Trump put out, it highlights, a lot of things that are true about how America is, just falling away in terms of health outcomes from the rest of the developed world, and specifically calls out mental health for children. And, I think my personal view on that is that like technology is driving a lot of that conflict. I mean, I don't know, like I've been, for the last 10 years waiting for there to be the like awesome educational platform that I look at and I'm like, oh my God, this is like
Mm,
amazing. They've like really figured out how to teach kids, and it's like learning, and it's like a really good platform. And like, my kids use Mathletics, they're doing typing club. Like I'm like, where's the educational company that Andreessen Horowitz invested in that's like just making really smart kids? Like, I haven't seen that company. I did dabble around, by the way, after TVN with this concept of like doing a virtual tutoring kind of platform company. Still haven't seen anything like it. Someone should go and solve that problem. Like, like for work, okay? You and I are having this conversation remotely, whereas we couldn't have done that not too long in the past. Psychiatry, what I'm seeing a lot, I'm going through an accelerator right now. It's focused on mental health and neuro. There's several companies that are doing like remote kind of psychiatry intervention. There's one company that is doing like AI psychiatry. So like, imagine ChatGPT that's a psychiatrist, specifically trained on data sets from therapy sessions, etc. But like, I haven't seen I'm not in this space, but I haven't seen any of that in education. And I wish I had, because, that's the kind of thing that I would love to introduce my kids to.
Yeah, I feel like the tutor model just makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
I wonder from an institution, I mean, you have a mug there where from Harvard where it probably cost you, how much is it to get a degree from Harvard these days? It's like a couple of $1 million, maybe. Million? I don't know if that how much of an exaggeration that would be. But how incentivized, I wonder, are some of these kind of institutions, even some of the private schools in Sydney and Melbourne. I don't know how incentivized they are to change the model, right? And even Australia as a country, it's like one of the biggest sources of income is actually international students. I just wonder if the institutions are just like, oh, let's really disrupt this model. Um, that is actually, it's the kind of like innovator's dilemma issue, right? It's like this is our lifeblood. This is what we do. Do we want to kind of really push the thing that disrupts it and completely upends it? But someone will eventually. The fact that we're talking about it, I'm sure there's a ton of people out there trying to do something around it. As the models get better and more intuitive, I just see it as I just see it as a inevitability that like the education that you're getting today for like paying like 40, 50 grand to get from like a fancy private school, you can probably be getting it like in a couple of years from a $20 subscription that is like interactive to you with like, I don't know. I guess that's the question of like, what is an education? Is it being surrounded by like other like ambitious people from like wealthy families, or is it actually, you know, giving you tools to actually learn and skill sets? Like, how do you actually think about education? Like, what is education for you?
I so I think that the unfortunate reality is we are a species that is largely looking for signals that the decisions that we're making are the right ones. And, having the stamp of I went to a fancy school, it means something when you're trying to get that fancy job that gets you the next fancy job and so on. Like, I mean, probably like I think if anything, the amount of spam that is now just flying in everyone's face at all times, it's sort of like backfired in that, like, a lot of my experience of late has been, okay, I'm trying to like pitch venture capital funds. The only way I could get in is by knowing someone who has a warm intro, right? Like, why is it not just meritocracy that we have the best tech? We should be able to get in front of anyone we want. That's just not how it works. So I guess like that's
And
one
that's
sort of, it does suck. Like, yeah, I mean, I also think that like when I went to South by Southwest last year, I went to this AI talk and it was like, AI is not going to take your job. This is what one of the speakers said, but the person who knows how to use AI will. And it's like, that kind of stuck with me in a way where it's like, well, the people who are going to really know how to use these tools that we develop are going to be the ones that have the resources to like play with them and learn them, and like, their parents have the free time to work with the kids and using them, and they have the tutors to train them on using these tools, and like ultimately it's, and they'll go to the Ivy Tower schools and be part of the big institutions.
I think that was the model. That was the model. I remember reading about like Bill Gates and Microsoft, and it's like, oh, Bill Gates, genius. And then like you look at his schooling, and he basically went to a school where there was like three of these like supercomputers in the country, and his like secondary school like had one of them.
Hmm.
Like he had exposure to this technology that just no one, and so he was literally on it day and night. And then so suddenly, yeah, he jumps out at like 16, 17 doing things that, you know, the majority of the world had never done before, but that has been exposure. I wonder with the, but like pretty much anyone can access these GPTs now though, right? Like there is a difference. You can like sit and kind of like you can learn to code on these things. It does feel, without sounding kind of cheesy and democratic, but it does feel like it is getting a little bit more democratic for that. Like if you had the inclination and wanted to sit there and play with it, I mean, if you want to sit down and code, like in the last 10 years, you could have done it. But just the guidance that, man, I was learning like Python at the start of the year, like, and building like, you know my level of like technical expertise, Josh. And like I was building like, companions for like chess and, all of these things. And like 2 hours, I was like, had something like up and working where it would have took me a year previously. And I just imagine like anyone who does have some sort of like drive or willingness to learn, I think is going to be able to. Whether all these kids do still get like access to that. Like I'm making an assumption here as like you know, a rich guy sat here in Byron Bay with like a fascination with technology that I go and play with these things. Like I don't know if like every kid in like Widnes where I'm from, like is sit there thinking about, okay, the future is like artificial intelligence and I want to teach myself GPTs. Like, yeah, but it does feel like I do feel a little bit like is more accessible. I hope it is.
Both things can be true, right?
Yeah.
So, like, yes, it's a more level playing field for accessing technology, but also, you know, it it still is, an elitist system that I
Mm.
think is not going away anytime soon. I wanted to tell you this one story that my friend told me 2 weeks ago. So I have a buddy who I think you've met. Uh, he's an Australian married to an American, and they met in America. They lived here for a bunch of years, had kids. They went back, um, and they found this school for their kids that's basically like training for being a founder of a company. And so, like, their whole class, like he was telling it to me, like, you know every day is tailored to their needs, and it's all AI driven and guided and stuff like that. And like the whole goal is you're working towards this senior project, which like get you into the best school. And like some people take advantage of that, and then other ones, like their senior project will get funded and they'll like go and start their company at 18 and stuff like that. And I mean, that, like, hearing him talk about it, it was pretty compelling. It was pretty
I mean,
awesome. I
I'm
was like,
sold. Yeah.
man, I wish I went to startup school. And like, but then I was also like, that's not available to everyone. Like,
Yeah,
that's
true. True. That's not available
for
to everyone.
very, yeah, this is not a model that's going to
Mm.
scale to like the broader population. I mean, so like at the end of the day, my point of view is like being there for your kids and having discussions with them, and like really being an active part of their lives. Schooling up until you're sort of somewhere in high school is sort of just like something to do until you're able to think for yourself. It's like get exposure to ideas and be around people who are smart and interesting and like can teach you how to moderate yourself. And then like so much of it is just like who's around.
So what do you think the skills are for? with Tal and Asha, who are what, 12 and 8, like what skills do you think, what traits do you think would be important for them as they come to graduate and actually if there are any jobs left by that point?
So
Like what do you think?
yesterday,
What do you need?
yesterday I was doing long math with Asha and like was really hard on her because she kept on making the same mistake over and over. And I was putting her to bed later and I was like, Asha, I'm sorry I was being a grumpy old man. You're doing great. And she was like, that's okay. You're doing great too at parenting. And I was like, awesome. I'll take
Oh,
it.
that's nice.
But like, I feel like my kids come home and they're like, yeah, my teacher is telling me that I need to like, work on my handwriting. And I'm like, we've had our kids learning how to type from like when they were able to sit up straight. So I'm like, okay, forget about handwriting. You just need to be able to communicate words and organize outlines, like to organize your thoughts. So that's something I've really emphasized. And then also like being able to stand up in front of people and express ideas and deliver messages and tell stories. Those are some of the critical skills that I've focused on with my kids. So, like, we try and do this once every 6 weeks. Sometimes it slips. We have this thing called Shabbat Salon, where on Friday night, a member of the family will deliver a presentation on a topic and go through slides. Like, the slides, you put them together, pretty quickly and like, but it's about, going through the exercise of what's a hypothesis, going through the storytelling and holding people's attention. And like, we try and, have another family or two over so that, it's not just like our family. There's kind of like a
That's
bit
cool. I
of,
like that. That's great.
I like it. Like, I feel like, children, like one of the things that I've sort of, old man hypothesized around what's wrong with the kids these days is just they're so coddled into not having to be in uncomfortable situations like we were. Uh, and like, the devices are the perfect distraction to having to be present and deal with discomfort. And so I'm like,
Like it's a mindfulness thing.
yeah, embrace the discomfort and
Mm.
practice and like, just throw your hat in the ring and like, you know, uh, AI will do everything else. So as long as you can tell a story and like get in front of people. Anyway, that's
That
been
seems to
my
be
approach.
that seems to be a theme that I'm hearing. The ability to persuade, the ability to structure your thoughts, not only for your persuasion, but even if you're interacting with an artificial intelligence, you're going to be able to want to structure your thoughts so you can actually fully engage with that. So like the kind of critical thinking, but like almost like systems analysis, like view of the world. Uh, and interestingly, the mindful thing keeps coming up as well. Just being able to regulate and find stillness and be with yourself for more than 10 seconds without having to pick something up to distract from that.
Yeah, Asha also a couple days ago gave me sleep advice, which was she was like, when I lay down, I like to think of something that makes me really happy and not think of things that make me really upset. And then I go to sleep. I was like, I'm going to try that.
It's very good. Oh,
Another thing on mindfulness,
mm,
I'm so glad that you got me into mindfulness. I don't know if you did or not, but you did. And I meditate every day now for 20 minutes. And
amazing.
actually, the other day I was meditating and I was thinking about you meditating, and it made me very happy.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I've just been doing a lot of meditating since the start of the year. I've just finished a 200-hour Kriya yoga teacher training, which is all Himalayan breath work and meditation and mantra. Dude, I've gone deep. I've gone deep.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm I'm 20 minutes.
Yeah,
That's
I've got a good story. It's super woo. I'll share it with you afterwards, but it's a good one.
nice. Cool.
Awesome, Josh. I appreciate you. We've got a lot going on at the moment, and love catching up as always. That was very insightful. I hope people find it useful, engaging, give another perspective, not just on the mental health issue, but also, some of the perspective about how we're thinking about kids and education and the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Cheers,
I
mate.
love you, man.
Love you
Good to
too.
catch up.
You too.